Think about it. The phone that's in your pocket right now, it pretty much works anywhere you go in the world. But that was not always the case, not by a long shot. The journey to get to one single global wireless standard, well, it was a messy, competitive, all-out battle. So in this explainer, we're going to dive into how, after the bruising wars of 3G, the world finally chose one path forward, 4G LTE.
Okay, let's just start right here. Do you remember this? I mean, really think about it. Picking your carrier meant you were picking a totally different version of the exact same phone. If you got the AT&T iPhone, great, you could use it when you traveled. But if you had the Verizon one, it was basically stuck in America. It was a huge headache and a perfect symbol of just how divided the wireless world really was.
Thankfully, that whole era is just gone. We don't even have to think about it anymore. And that's because the entire industry, after all those years of being fragmented, finally got on the same page and picked a single global standard. And that standard was 4G LTE. So the big question is, how did that happen? How did one technology manage to win and create this super connected world we all live in today?
To really get why LTE was such a game changer, you have to go back in time. You have to understand the chaos that came right before it. We'll call it the era of the 3G wars. It was a time of deep, deep division and some really intense competition that basically set the stage for everything that was about to happen.
So back in the 3G world, there were basically two major camps duking it out. In one corner, you had WCDMA. This was the big one, the dominant global system that came out of a collaboration between Europe and Japan. It's the path most of the world went down. And in the other corner, you had the very America-centric CDMA 2000, which grew out of an older standard and was really pushed by patents from the mobile giant Qualcomm. This rivalry? This was the root cause of that whole phone incompatibility mess.
And you know, this whole split was just incredibly inefficient. Companies were taking on mountains of debt, spending billions and billions to build out these completely separate 3G networks. The problem was, for the longest time, nobody really cared. The networks were all built up, but the telecom companies were just kind of stumbling around, desperately searching for that one killer app that would finally make their massive investment pay off.
And then, that killer app arrived. Or actually, it was a killer device. In 2007, the iPhone landed. Android followed in 2008, and together they just unleashed this absolute tidal wave of data that nobody, and I mean nobody, was ready for. The entire industry was caught completely flat-footed.
The change was just staggering. Get this, after less than a year on the market, iPhones were already making 50 times more Google searches than any other mobile device out there. People weren't just taking little sips of data anymore, they were chugging it by the gallon.
And then the App Store launched, and that just threw everything into overdrive. In its very first weekend, users downloaded over 10 million apps. And every single one of those apps was sucking down data on networks that were never, ever designed to handle that kind of load.
The results were immediate and pretty painful. 3G networks just started to crumble under the pressure. Dropped calls, painfully slow speeds, that became the new normal. It all came to a head at the South by Southwest Festival in 2009. You had thousands of iPhone users all in one place, and the entire AT&T network just fell apart. It was a total meltdown.
And this quote from an analyst at the time, Gene Munster, it just perfectly captures the feeling. Everybody knew this was just the beginning. The data boom was on track to double every single year, and people started predicting a full-on mobile apocalypse where the networks would just grind to a halt. It was obvious that a simple Band-Aid wouldn't work. They needed a real long-term solution, and they needed it fast.
So, with their networks literally on the brink of collapse, the world's telecom companies finally realized they had to work together. This led to something called the Next Generation Mobile Networks Alliance, or NGMN. And they started to formally lay out what a true 4G standard would have to look like.
They basically boiled it down to three main goals. First, the obvious one. They needed way more bandwidth and capacity to handle that data tsunami. Second, they wanted convergence, a single unified network for both voice and data, so they could get rid of the clunky two-network system they had with 3G. And finally, they wanted a cleanup, a chance to start fresh and design a simpler, way more efficient standard from a clean sheet of paper.
The leading proposal to meet all these goals had a pretty ambitious name, Long-Term Evolution, or as we all know it, LTE. It came from the 3GPP, the same group that was behind that dominant WCDMA standard. And it wasn't just about being faster. It promised to be smarter with the airwaves, have lower latency, and be incredibly flexible. So what was the secret sauce? What made LTE so much better?
Well, at the very heart of this new standard was a core technology with a ridiculously complicated name, orthogonal frequency division multiple access. Let's just call it OFDMA. But the idea behind it is actually really cool.
Okay, let's forget the jargon for a second and try an analogy. Imagine a bunch of people are trying to read you a single sentence. Now, instead of one person reading one word at a time, what if each person said one word but at a different musical pitch, and they all did it at the exact same time? Your brain is smart enough to tune into each specific pitch to hear the individual words and then put the sentence back together. That, in a nutshell, is how OFDMA so efficiently packs a ton of data into the airwaves.
But here's the thing. LTE was not a guaranteed winner, not at all. Just like what happened with 3G, a whole new battle was brewing for the 4G crown. Two other major contenders stepped into the ring, each with some really powerful backers, and it set the stage for another high-stakes fight for the future of wireless.
All right, so here were the three main players. You had LTE, which had this massive backing from that NGMN alliance. We're talking about 70% of the world's telecoms. Then you had WiMAX, which was championed by tech giants like Intel and the US carrier Sprint. It actually had a head start and was technically available first. And finally, there was UMB, which was Qualcomm's baby, a direct successor to its CDMA 2000 tech.
And right about here is where things got super confusing for everyday people. Carriers started throwing this 4G label on everything. But what did it actually mean? Well, the official definition from the big standards body, the International Telecommunications Union, or ITU, it was actually really strict.
The funny thing is, at first, none of these technologies, not even the first version of LTE, actually met the ITU's tough requirements for what real 4G was supposed to be. But that didn't stop carriers like Verizon and Sprint from marketing their new networks as 4G anyway. And after a while, the ITU basically just gave up and relaxed the definition. 4G became a marketing term that just meant any substantial improvement over 3G. So despite all that marketing noise and confusion, a clear technical winner was starting to pull away from the pack. The industry's deep desire for one single unified standard turned out to be the most powerful force of all. And one by one, the other contenders started to drop out, leaving LTE as the undisputed champion.
The victory really happened in a few key stages, like dominoes falling. First, in 2009, Qualcomm saw which way the wind was blowing and just ditched UMB to get on the LTE train. Then, in 2011, Sprint, the biggest cheerleader for WiMAX, finally conceded and announced it was switching to LTE too. But the final nail in the coffin for any competition? That was 2012, when Apple released the iPhone 5, the first ever iPhone to support LTE. And that just triggered a massive wave of adoption.
And, well, the rest is history. From a pretty slow start, LTE adoption just exploded. By 2022, there were an estimated 5.16 billion LTE subscriptions across the globe. It literally became the universal language of mobile data.
So after all those messy, expensive, inefficient battles of 2G and 3G, the industry's biggest goal was finally a reality: convergence. We finally had one network, one standard, connecting billions of people all over the world. A phone you bought in one country could finally, reliably, just work in another.
The journey to 4G LTE gave us a unified world, and it was a huge technical and political achievement. But now, as we're all moving into the era of 5G and we're starting to hear whispers about 6G, you gotta ask the question, can we hold on to this unity? Or are we destined to see the wireless world splinter and fragment all over again?